Well, hold on 1 second. Okay, you may begin.
Specifically within the LGBTQ plus community. Active in her community, Allison serves as president of the Diversity Chamber of Central Ohio, Central Ohio's LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce, and sits on the board of governors for Stonewall Columbus. Outside of helping clients, Allison loves to travel with her wife Heidi, hang out with her cats, Stabler and Benson. Love those names. And enjoy outdoor activities like golfing, snowboarding, and tennis. Today, we are going to talk about the history of LGBTQ plus laws in the US and how those laws still have an impact today. We'll cover topics like how to make your legal drafting more inclusive and how paralegals can get out in the community and make a difference. Allison, thank you for being here today. Welcome. We are so pleased to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you, Angela.
We will launch right in whenever you're ready.
All right, I will see if I can share my screen successfully again. All right, can you all see that? Does that show up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm super excited to do this presentation. If you have questions, please ask them. I love questions. I am by no means an expert. Before you all got on, I was talking with Angela about how the vocabulary in the queer community changes and sometimes how it can be a mouthful. Getting LGBTQ plus out all the time is a lot. So I'll often refer to the entire community as the queer community because it's just a little bit easier on the tongue. But certainly, if you have questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand and ask, or just unmute and ask. So when we think about the history of the LGBT movement in the US, a lot of folks think about the Stonewall riots in 1969. Absolutely true. That's probably the biggest monumental thing that happened in the history to start it. And if you think about it, gay marriage happened, I think, 9 years ago with Obergefell, if I can do my math correctly. And so some people think, oh my gosh, you've gotten so many things in the queer community in the last decade. Like, what more could you want? It's like, we've been working on this for, 70 years or 60 years. This was just a part of the history. And also, if you can tell, I'm very bad at math. So that might have been 50 years now. I don't know. So here's kind of a little bit more of the history. And I don't know if you can see that speaker box if that's in the way. So there was actually a community organization, kind of like the precursor to the Human Rights Campaign that you may see. It's that blue square with yellow equal sign. That's kind of the logo for today's Human Rights Campaign. But there was actually the Society for Human Rights formed in 1924. And I didn't bore people with like 1800s, like the first use of the word lesbian, but that appeared in like 1820. We're kind of talking about more modern US based history. So these are kind of the different things that have happened. So 1961, Illinois was the first state to decriminalize its sodomy laws. And so that was like a patchwork of state issues until, as you'll see later, there's a Supreme Court case on it. 1969 was that police raid on the Stonewall Inn in New York City. If anyone's been to New York, it's kind of like a ho-hum bar that really shouldn't have created a lot of attention, but because it was frequented by the queer community, it did. And so it is now kind of very well known and is sought out as kind of a landmark. The following year, to mark the riots and to give homage and to remember it, that's when the first Pride Parade happened, was in 1970. So then in 1973, we had Maryland to statutorily ban same-sex marriage. So we started bans all the way back to 1973. It was also removed from the list of mental disorders. So prior to 1973, it was also considered a mental illness, which is interesting. 1975, we saw at the federal level a gay rights bill actually get introduced. It didn't go anywhere, but it was at least introduced. 1982, Wisconsin outlawed discrimination based on sexual orientation. This is huge because I will tell you today, you still don't have this right in some states, Ohio included. Ohio, you can actually be fired, evicted, or denied a loan because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. So Wisconsin was 45 years plus in advance of where we are in Ohio today. How does my screen go? Okay. 1983, we saw a court case, and I don't remember what district this is, I apologize, that prohibited discrimination based on HIV and AIDS status. So like that was really big in the 70s and 80s. 93, we had President Bill Clinton sign Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That was the military policy of we're not going to kick people out for being gay as long as they don't tell us they're gay, which is an interesting policy. 1996, Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act that was essentially preserving one man, one woman. 2003, this is when Lawrence v. Texas was decided. To 2003, that's not that long ago. That's 21 years ago, when the Supreme Court said that you could not criminalize same-sex conduct. So I just let that sink in because that's not very long. In 2011, with President Obama, that's when you'll see a lot of these cases have happened and occurred. It was a different political environment that was much more inclusive. And so President Obama repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was allowing our military to be out loud, proud, and not be fired from military service. 2013 is the United States versus Windsor decision that said states specifically could legalize gay marriage and the federal government couldn't prohibit it. So it was like more kind of what is currently happening with abortion. It's a state issue at the federal level. We just can't interfere with states' rights. And so what happened in Windsor, which I think is worth mentioning because it paved the way for Obergefell. Edie Windsor was married in Canada to her wife, and it was recognized in, I think it was Massachusetts or New York. I think it was New York. And when her wife died, they were very wealthy. She was getting assessed a income tax or death tax on the assets that her wife left her because they didn't recognize her marriage. Had they recognized her marriage, then she would be exempt from the spousal exemption from their inheritance tax or death tax. And so that's how that case got to the Supreme Court. And they said, no, you have to recognize their marriage. They were legally married, which was a huge landmark. And then in 2015, we had Obergefell v. Hodges. That's an Ohio case that the Supreme Court basically said you have to allow same-sex marriage across the country. To deny it would violate constitutional equal rights. That was also like an estate planning-esque issue in that Jim Obergefell's husband passed away, and he wanted to be buried in the same place as his husband, and the deed restriction said that they had to be married. And they were married when Mr. Obergefell's husband was really sick. They life flighted him from Ohio, I think, to somewhere on the East Coast. They had a wedding on the tarmac because the husband was terminal, and then flew back to solidify their marriage so that this could happen. And so I just always think these are very interesting to understand. How did we get there? How did we get to marriage equality? And how is the law kind of played into it? oops. So kind of past marriage equality, we have some more kind of progress being made in quick succession. So in 2017, we had prohibition against discrimination of LGBTQ employees that was built into the Civil Rights Act, right? The court said, no, civil rights include discrimination. You know, it used to be race, religion, gender, now sexual orientation is included within that protection. At the same time, the District of Columbia allowed residents to use a gender neutral option on their IDs, which is huge. 2018, the first transgender person signed with the military. Really quickly thereafter, President Trump says trans people can't serve in the military. 2020, this is like the start of bathroom bill black hole. I don't know a better way to say it. Like we start to see a lot of these. And so the Fourth Circuit says it's unconstitutional. This isn't it's not the Supreme Court. We haven't seen one of these bathroom bills get all the way to the Supreme Court. So we see states continue to introduce them, including Ohio. 2021, the federal government allows for self-selection on passports. You can now use X as a gender neutral marker on your passport. And you can go back and change. So I'll get into it, but there are programs that do name and gender change clinics throughout Ohio that allow and guide individuals on how to make these selections if they had a passport before 2021 when a non-binary gender marker was available. 2022, the Social Security Administration allows you to choose your gender marker. So if you were born female, but you identify as male, you can make that change. And then 2023, Biden signs Respect for Marriage Act, which is a federal law that solidifies what came down in Obergefell, which is, doesn't matter your gender, you can marry who you love. I know that's a lot. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, these are the Supreme Court cases. I like to highlight some of these as well because they get lost in that whole litany. So in 82, we have Bowers versus Hardwick, which basically says if you're queer, you have no expectation of privacy in the bedroom. Like that's reserved for heterosexual couples. It's not until 2003, which when the police raided the Lawrence household when they were engaged in intimate activity, that they said, no, we're throwing that out. It applies to everyone. We have the 2003 Windsor case, 05 Obergefell, and then we have the Masterpiece Cake Shop. This was in 2018, and it was a highly anticipated case on both sides because it was a religious cake baker who was asked to make a wedding cake for a queer couple. And the question is that speech? Does the cake baker have the right to free speech, free expression of his views versus theirs? Can he deny making a cake? With this, we had the appointees from the Trump administration on the Supreme Court, and it did not go the way the queer community had expected, and they preserved the right of the cake maker to express their beliefs over the queer community. So essentially, conservative Christian values were able to take precedent. Now, this 2020 case is Bostock versus Clayton, which says it's illegal to fire a person based on sexual orientation. It's the first case we've seen. I still don't think we're getting full adoption of it because I guarantee you there's a lot of discrimination still happening, but we at least have a case that would allow there to be some sort of recourse. Oh, hold on. All right. So if anyone went to the Pride Festival, they probably saw a lot of flags. I was talking with friends last week. If you go to Stonewall, which is a community center in Central Ohio, they're the folks that put on Pride. They have cards that list like all of the different flags that are available. There's the traditional old Pride flag that does not include the black-brown colors. It also doesn't include the light pink, light blue colors. So like the one on here is the original pride flag back from 1978. There's been modernization to make sure that we're including the Black and brown community, which are the Black and brown stripes, as well as the trans community, which are the light pink and light blue. So you'll see flags that have like a triangle cut out and then have pride colors plus Black and brown. That is kind of now the fully adopted pride flag, or more generally used one, because it's more inclusive of Black, brown, and trans communities. And then I realized early in the presentation, I used a lot of different words that maybe you don't fully understand, because sometimes they're hard to remember, or may just be like, I've heard them, but I don't know what they are. So when we talk about cisgender, this comes up a lot. Like, I'm a cisgender female. It means my gender that I was born with aligns with how I identify. The opposite would be transgender, which is the body that you were born with is not how you identify your sex. LGBTQ+, that's the acronym often used for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. Like I said before, queer is kind of a catch-all for the community as well. Pronouns, this gets a lot of press, or at least it used to. So the major ones are he, him, she, her, and they, them. You may see people who use he or they, just saying I'm indifferent, you can call me either. You do see some other ones like z, zir. Some folks still use it, its. So it's always really polite when you're talking with your clients to ask, hey, what are your pronouns? How do you identify? And you can do this for folks that you know are straight. Like, I think that's very wonderful to ask those questions. But it is a thing that you can build into your forms and intake if you're going to be drafting anything where you have to use pronouns to refer to your client. Non-binary, this is a person whose gender identity or expression falls out of the binary. They don't identify as male, they don't identify as female, they kind of are fluid and in between. And then ally. Ally is a cisgender or straight person, one or the other, who supports the LGBTQ community. Means they help with pride, they generally advocate for their queer counterparts, and something that I think we just need more of. Okay. And then there is bisexual, and this is a person who is attracted to more than one gender. Not necessarily at the same time. It doesn't mean a throuple situation, but it just may be they might date a man one time and then date a woman. It differs from pansexual, which is the person is attracted to the human being, not necessarily the gender, or they may not see gender. And so they just see they love a person. Again, not multiple people at the same time, just who they're attracted to. I guess is the best explanation I have. Gay, general term to refer to someone attracted to the same gender. It's often used to refer to men who love men or men with men, but not necessarily. It can be used kind of similarly to queer, though it does not capture the bisexual, pansexual, trans community. So, yeah. And then gender fluid, it's a person who doesn't identify with a single gender or unfixed gender. And that's a lot of times where you'll see folks who use he, they, or she, they. It's because they're kind of to the world saying either I don't have a preference or I am pretty gender fluid. You may see me in like a suit and tie one day, and you may see me in a dress and heel the next day. And that's more of a gender fluid person. And then again, queer is a kind of a catch-all. I know when I have said this to my dad, he still thinks of it in his mind from 1960, where it was a derogatory term. It is not, as long as it's used appropriately. And then these are kind of the known pronouns that we have available. So he, him, his, she, her, hers, he, they, she, they. This one, yo, is interesting. I was doing research and saw that this has become popular with the younger generation. It was a New York Times article, so if anyone's interested. And then Z, zir, and XM. The last one's hard to say. I think I pronounced that correctly. So yeah, when we talk about pronouns too, I think sometimes we can unintentionally insult someone by using the wrong pronouns with greetings. I remember, I don't know, 6 years ago, I was going through a Starbucks drive-through and I said, "Thanks, ma'am." And I was very quickly corrected that I am not a ma'am. And I was like, oh, crud. Like it was just trying to be polite. And so the same thing when we're like, Mr. So-and-so. Do we know for certain that they use the he, him pronouns and prefer Mr.? I actually really don't like salutations and greetings, Mr. and Miss, Mrs., because it creates this like gender assumption. And it's also hard if you get a gender neutral name. Reese. I know a female Reese and I know a male Reese. I can very easily screw that up by saying Mr. So-and-so, insert last name. Well, I just assumed a gender. And so I give that to you for any of your drafting, or if you're communicating with a client and you don't know how they identify, you may not want to use those type of salutations. The gender neutral version is MX. So instead of MR or MRS, MX period. So if you don't know if you want to start using that just generally, but that's all within your practice. If you represent very conservative folks, you may not want to because they may find it offensive. So you may want to just drop the salutations altogether. Again, I run my own firm so I can do what I want, but you all work for people, I think. So you kind of have to do what they want, but that could be an education piece for the partners, for the attorneys that you're working with. All right, despite being bad at numbers, I did include some because I think this is important to know how much money is out there and what the reason is why you want to adopt some policies to create a more inclusive environment. So as of 2024, 7.6% of the population in the US identifies as LGBTQ. When we look at kids under 18, sorry, where's that one? I have it in here somewhere. The number when we look at kids under 18 is astronomically higher. I don't know if I included it in the slide deck. If we're looking from a percentage that have families, so if you're talking about family law, divorce, estate planning, 14% of those same-sex couples have kids under 18. And so compared to 37% of heterosexual couples. I know when I looked at that, I was like, gosh, that's low. I feel like a lot of people have kids, but it's 14.7. So it's about half of what straight couples do. But more importantly, $3.9 trillion in global purchasing power. Even if LGBTQ folks do not have kids, they have dual incomes likely. The other piece is 1 in 3 LGBTQ Americans have faced discrimination in the past year. I think that's from 2021, so that may have changed. But regardless, that's still an astronomically high number. And in the way that they may have considered that, the things I think of, I go to the doctor's office and they ask questions about who's your husband? Because it's like, oh, it's a woman's clinic. Let's ask about her husband. Well, that's not appropriate. I don't have a husband. I have a wife. She's wonderful. And so like when we talk about your forms and intake, you may want to use spouse 1 and spouse 2 or partner 1 and partner 2 and not presume that they're married to someone of the opposite gender. Oh, here's the number that jumps. Okay. So 1.5% of the US identifies as trans or not binary. Under 30, that's 5.1%. So we will see and continue to see folks that take up that space and are loud and are identifying that way. And in the past, they likely existed, but we're too afraid to be their authentic selves. And 1.2 million number of same-sex households in the US. So just to say, there's a lot of us. And this is a name and gender change clinic in ways that you all can help. So it's Equitas, Trans Ohio, and I'm going to forget the other organization that has partnered to do this name and gender change clinic. Oliver Licking is the person who is kind of spearheads this. I verified with them that paralegals are welcome to volunteer. They have to go through training with an attorney, but then they can help with the clinic. And the clinic's amazing. It's usually via Zoom on like a Wednesday night from 5 to 7, and you get to meet with folks all over the state. to help them understand how can they change their name or gender marker in their county. Oliver and his team have created amazing guides that help understand what that county specifically does or won't do. So birth certificates in Ohio is a really interesting place right now. We were the last state in the country that would allow individuals to change their gender marker on their birth certificate. It went up to the Ohio Supreme Court. The Ohio Supreme Court says, yes, you have to be able to do this. And so there wasn't a way in statute that said this is how you can change your gender marker. And so it fell to the probate courts. They handle name changes. It seems like something they should do because it was originally handled by Vital Statistics and Public Health. Public Health department stopped doing it, and I don't remember why. And so the probate court started doing it. Well, now that's being challenged, and it's actually awaiting a ruling from the Ohio Supreme Court. Does the probate court have the authority to order the public health department to change a gender marker? They do have other authorities, like if there's a misspelling on a birth certificate, they have the ability to do that, or if the doctor screwed up. So it kind of falls within it, but it's being challenged, and we're waiting a decision any day from the Ohio Supreme Court. But I say all of that to say, in the Name and Gender Change Clinic, they know what counties will allow you to do it or will not, and how you get into the different counties. There's like 3 ways that you can use a specific county's jurisdiction based on where your mom carried you, where you were born, where you reside. I think those are the 3. Don't quote me because I always have to refer back to the jurisdiction requirements. Other things. Oh, we have a question. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I almost forgot to take myself off of mute. Okay, so for me personally, me and my husband have been together and we're a same-sex couple. We've been together going on 22 years next month. We were legally married in Florida in 2018. And with a lot of same-sex couples, like you were mentioning, each keeps their own last name. But in early 2021, I wanted to go through the process of taking his last name, which you see Norfleet, that's his last name. So I've taken it. So in 2021, I reached out to the court in Florida where we had our marriage ceremony, and I was given a directive of the first thing I would need to do would be to apply for an updated Social Security card with the Social Security Administration. And this was in Ohio, where I did this. This was in Ohio. So, and this was during COVID. So I had to get all my documentation together, put it in an envelope, and put it in a Dropbox because the SSA wasn't open to foot traffic at the time. And so I got an updated Social Security card, and then that allowed me to update my driver's license, my passport, all the other documentation, and with my banks and other entities and stuff like that. So in what you're mentioning with the X marker and the name change, and since then, like I said, the name you see there, Norfleet, that's my husband's last name, and I've used this since early 2021. But would there have been another step I would have needed to do to officially carry his last name?
So Malachi, what you're kind of describing is what straight women have traditionally had to go through when they get married to change their name. Right. So the process you're describing is accurate. What I was talking about is the gender marker. That is a different process. So instead of, were you born male?
Yes.
You said husband, and you said you were the same sex. So,
yes. Yes, I was born male. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. If you had wanted to change the gender marker to either X or female, then it's a different process, and that's what I'm talking about. Not necessarily name change. That the name change process for gay couples and straight couples and anyone in the gender fluid queer space is the same. It's just the gender marker that's currently litigated.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Other ways in which you can volunteer. Stonewall Columbus, like I said, is a community center in Central Ohio. It's right on High Street. It has a lovely rooftop if you ever want to host events there. But they also always request volunteers. The community center itself does different kind of organizations and groups. They have Family Pride Network, which is a space for queer couples that want to adopt kids to learn about the adoption process, or queer couples who have kids that are just looking for a community. They also have Trailblazers. It is their, I think, over 55, I think is age cutoff, lesbian group. That's just older women who like to get together. I don't think you specifically have to identify as female to be part of it, though I would check their requirements. They also have counseling, HIV testing, pop-up clinics, all sorts of things. And so they need a variety of volunteers throughout the year, as well as a lot of volunteers to pull off the Pride Festival. Just for context, that festival gets 750,000 people, and the staff that put it on is about 12. So there are a lot of volunteers that are needed to put that festival on. So if you want to start thinking and planning for next year, that would be amazing. And then there's also KYC. It's Kaleidoscope Youth Center. They do a lot within the under 20, I think is their cutoff. But they have a drop-in center. They do a lot of activities and give kids under that age a safe space to be who they are. It's a wonderful organization. And so if you have any desire to volunteer, please, those are the two places that I would, or the three that I kind of recommend, depending on what you're looking to do. All right. So here are kind of like my practical tips for professionals. I love using they, them pronouns when I'm drafting anything, because I don't have to remember, crap, did I switch from he to she or she to he because I was using very binary terms? They is wonderfully inclusive. You don't ever have to go back and say, oh, this contract was actually for someone who identifies as female, and so I have to make sure everything is she. And I think we'll start to see a lot more of that moving forward because of that. The thing that I like to do, there's a chat question. Oh, agree, yeah. Good, someone's already doing it. It does make things easier. Making sure when we're talking with folks of HR policies and handbooks and rules for apartment complexes or what have you, when we're writing those, cannot discriminate based on, we're including gender expression and gender identity, because sexual orientation is protected, but we don't necessarily see gender identity and gender expression, which is going to capitalize on or going to address folks who are non-binary or are trans. We're seeing a lot of transphobia. And so if we can talk to our clients about why that may be important, it's future thinking that there may be protections, then they don't have to revise their contracts in the future, but it is something they have to be comfortable with now as well. Removing gender specific language, right? Not husband and wife, spouse one, spouse two, partner one, partner two. And then when we ask about kids, like this isn't necessarily just about married couples, but you could ask, like, if you're doing adoption, is the child male or female? Well, what about like X or non-binary? Including that option is really wonderful as well to make people feel very comfortable using your services. When we're looking at things that could be more challenging, like let's say it's a domestic abuse situation or estate planning, we have to dig into those questions. How comfortable is your family with this? How much are they going to be a pain in the butt or disrupt the process? Especially in estate planning, are they going to challenge the will and say, like, there's no way they were legally married, like their husband shouldn't get all of this, or what have you? We want to make sure that we can address those the same way we would if we knew that like one of the kids of a straight couple was a gold digger and didn't like the new wife of, his old elder father married someone young, right? But there's different planning techniques we're going to use if we expect some sort of hotly contested thing. So having those conversations in a nice and kind way. Hey, we like to plan for everything. Do you have any reason to think this will be contested? It's a great way. You can ask that to everyone. You may already, I try to, but there's also other considerations. I did an estate plan for a lesbian couple that lived in the country and they had never told anyone they were married. Everyone thought they were roommates. They've never said anything else. And they wanted their plan to reflect that on everything, to not say spouse. We just had to say like good friend when talking about powers of attorney. So again, things to talk about. Do they want this disclosed? Do they not? There can be different considerations for why they would or would not. Again, then also ask your clients as part of the intake procedure, what pronouns would they prefer you use? It can be a great way to make sure that you're addressing them appropriately. And if you don't know, take away the salutation. The number of times I've had an attorney email me and say, Mr. Harrison, because I'm an attorney, clearly I must be male. I'm not really sure. That is always frustrating. And so if you take those out and you just use first names, it's amazing. But again, talk to your firm, make sure everyone's very comfortable with that. Yes. And if anyone was confused, this is the transgender pride flag that I was referencing. You'll see that as part of like a square insert into the otherwise traditional pride flag. Okay. And then here are resources. Let's say you are helping someone within the queer community, helping a friend come out. Just sort of like, I don't know what this thing is, and I'm looking for resources. These are all Ohio or Central Ohio based LGBT nonprofits. So PFLAG is parents of, and I wish I knew the whole acronym, but I know it's for parents of LGBT kids. And so it's a good resource. They have meetup groups and things that kind of piggyback on what Stonewall does with the Family of Pride Network. There is Kaleidoscope Youth Center. I already went over that. Equitas, it is on top of hosting the Name and Gender Change Clinic. They are also a healthcare provider that concentrates and markets within the queer community. And so they do a lot with HIV testing PrEP, which is the HIV prevention or suppression pill. They also, when monkeypox was really coming out as big, they were doing monkeypox vaccines. And so they're kind of at the forefront of what does the queer community need for healthcare. Stonewall, we went over that. Equality Ohio, it is kind of like the lobbying group of the bunch. They do a lot with tracking what the legislation is, advocating. And I believe Equality Ohio and Stonewall both, and maybe Equitas, I can't remember, will provide DE&I training on LGBTQ folks more in depth than I can. They have trained professionals that do this. And so if you're like, this is amazing, I wish everyone in my firm knew, those groups do it on like a professional basis and can bring people in to have those conversations and do the training and help review the forms. So just good resources to have. And if you go to any of their website, it is full of great information if you ever need anything. Trans Ohio, it's one of the newer nonprofits in the space, but they've been around for a decade, I believe, or more. And they provide advocacy and support groups for folks who are trans, going through transition, provide resources as far as medical care, who is a safe space to go to. And then there's Bravo. It is a survivor advocacy and support group. So folks who have suffered from domestic violence in queer relationships. Bravo is a wonderful resource for those folks.
A question, does law enforcement in general, do they approach, treat, think of domestic abuse differently when it's not a heterosexual couple?
They can. It depends on the officer, their temperament, the day, what city you're in. Because unfortunately in Ohio, if you are not in, I call it the gay bubble, the 270 loop, you may be in a community that just doesn't think that that's a thing, right? You can't be gay. You clearly can't be in a relationship. And so you get a lot of that homophobia that will come in and just be like, what's not a domestic dispute? You're not a couple, like will not recognize that. But yeah, and also if you think about it traditionally, let's say two men got in a fight, you'd be like, oh, boys being boys, right? They got in a bar fight or whatever. But when it's a domestic issue and two men get in a fight, that's a different dichotomy that the officer may not be trained on. Does that answer the question, Angela?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what protections or recourse a victim of a domestic abuse situation might have if law enforcement, doesn't accept it or doesn't deal with it, or it treats it differently, or says this isn't domestic abuse, you just had a fight with your friend.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem. That's why I think Bravo started and I know it's been around pre-marriage equality. And so before Obergefell, I don't think anyone in Ohio really would have thought anything of it. Like, oh, it's just two men in a fight or two women in a cat fight, those kind of like very draconian or archaic thoughts. They're not trained. And if you look at, again, outside of Columbus, I think the Columbus Police Department does a really decent job of training their cadets on LGBTQ inclusion. I know they sometimes bring Stonewall to do some of those things. But outside of your major metropolitan areas, you're not getting that sort of training.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Putting this presentation together was a little depressing, not gonna lie. But it's worth sharing. Oh, Stacy, thank you for getting key flag. Parents, families, friends of lesbian and gays. Awesome. Yes, and you're in a rural county. Yeah, it is different once you get outside of 270. All right, I pulled this from ACLU. These are in 2024. We're only halfway through all of the anti-LGBT bills in the country. 516. I think Ohio actually pulled one, presented it last night. I think I saw something on social media. I haven't looked into it, so we might be at way more. So here are all of the wonderful bills Ohio legislatures have put together. We have 7 so far this year, and I'll go into each one of them individually, so you kind of have an idea of what Ohio legislatures are doing and what could be impacting your clients moving forward. So we'll go with House Bill 245. We'll start left to right. This is kind of proverbially the drag ban. It would prohibit entertainers from exhibiting a different gender identity than the ones they were born with, unless it's in an adult cabaret. If we think about this, the performance Mrs. Doubtfire would be prohibited under this bill, right? If everyone remembers that classic movie, why can't I remember his name? Amazing comedian, dresses up like a woman housekeeper so that he can see his kids, right?
Dustin Hoffman?
Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, thank you.
Oh, okay.
And so like, while I understand, it has more far-reaching impacts. And so this is a really interesting bill. This one is still, I think, in committee. It hasn't moved out. We have House Bill 6. It would prohibit trans athletes from participating in school sports. This is at the high school and collegiate level. So you would only be able to play sports in the identity that you were born with. House Bill 8, I think, is more atrocious. It would require schools to notify parents if their students change their gender identity at school, including if they are not in a safe space. If their parents are extremely homophobic, it would put the kid in danger by outing them. School may be the only safe space in which the child has. Again, that's Ohio legislature. It's not law yet. House Bill 5 would just remove DE&I. It would prohibit state colleges and universities from mandating DE&I training, and it would have to remove any DE&I considerations from admissions. We already have some of that at the federal level with repealing, oh gosh, I didn't include this, so I don't remember the case, but considering applications, race, background, all of those things in college admissions. It was in the Supreme Court's last term. And so some of that has already been kind of stripped back, but this would take it a step further. So that is, again, a bill. There's House Bill 83. This is the bathroom bill, requiring students to use the bathroom that aligns with the gender they were born with at birth. So any trans students would be forced to use a bathroom that does not conform to how they express their identity. And again, this is students. And then Senate Bill 83. Again, it's a different version of the House Bill 5 to prohibit DE&I training for higher education. So this passed earlier this year, House Bill 68. There was a lot of media in my world about it, but I don't know that everyone knows it. no custody can be adjusted because one parent refuses to consent to gender affirming care or mental health care for trans or non-binary kids, mostly trans. So they would have to stay with whatever the arrangement was, absent the parent, not conforming. So it can put kids who are trans in a really hostile environment if one parent is super accepting and then they have to go split time with the other parent who is not. It prohibits healthcare providers from prescribing hormone blockers. Hormone blockers are used for kids who are trans to suppress developing like facial hair if they are a trans woman, or developing breasts if they're a trans man. A lot of other things, but that's kind of like the very easy outward display. And then it also bans trans kids from playing high school sports and college. And I shouldn't say it bans them completely. They would have to participate in the sport based on the gender they were born with. That is the end of my presentation, but if anyone has any questions, thoughts, conversations, I'm happy to entertain or answer.
Okay, I guess we will open it up. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Don't be shy.
I guess I have a question. So you do estate planning and that type of stuff, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. I guess I was just wondering, like, I know you kind of touched on it with gender neutral pronouns and that type of stuff, but how does estate planning, real estate's another big one, that type of stuff affect how you do your job for your clients when you're supporting, I guess, LGBTQ plus individuals?
So I think in a lot of ways, it's very much the same as you would a heterosexual couple or straight folks. However, the things that differentiate it are, how are we greeting people? Are we asking about their pronouns? Are we asking, is it okay to refer in your will to your partner as your spouse? Or do you not want that? It's those things because, as we saw, traditionally, there's been so much discrimination. They may not feel comfortable because they're not out to their family. They're worried about something. Like, that's part of it. We also see a lot of older queer folks who never got married. And so they may be a 50-year lifelong partnership, but they never did the documents. And so we just have to take that into consideration, knowing there's going to be no spousal claim. So let's make sure that everything is documented. And currently what we're seeing in the community is a lot of folks who are really nervous based on some of the dissenting opinions in Supreme Court cases that marriage equality will be overturned and they will be left with a null and void marriage. And so that's something also that's a talking point for the community. And so the documents themselves don't vary very much. It's those conversations that change. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? There's no bad questions.
I have one. Along that same vein, thanks, Vanessa, for asking. I do a lot of work with like wills and estate planning as well. And so if you did have a couple, I guess this is a very particular question. They're out and proud, but their family may not acknowledge that. I guess, like, I know there's a whole disinheritance clause where you state like this person knows why they're not included, or, I have made a point to not include so-and-so in the will. Is that something you would add to that section? Like,
Yeah.
like, I know I want this to go to my partner or spouse, my person, despite what my family may believe. Like, is that something you would include in the will?
Sometimes I include it in the will. Sometimes we'll do a cover letter that really just outlines it. It's not part of the will, but it'll be an explanation and it can always be brought in. But sometimes as well, if we think it's going to be like a really, like, let's say the parents are very well to do and we know they're going to fight it, we may have them execute 3 of the exact same wills 3 months apart. Okay, fine, challenge that one. Great. We'll go to the one that was 3 months before that. Okay, great, challenge that. We'll go back to the one that was 6 months before that. Like at that point, you know that the testator had a very valid capacity. This wasn't someone held a gun to his head. There's not those factors involved because it happened so many times over a period. Like it just makes it more, I don't know, bulletproof is the concept.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
What about kind of along that same line? And this isn't a document you would be drafting, but if there was a same-sex couple and a parent had any kind of wealth at all, and a parent had drafted their will in specifying that proceeds would be distributed to their child and spouse. What I imagine that opens up a big kettle of fish, a big can of worms.
Would or would disinherit them and say, no, they're not included because they're queer?
But if they didn't specifically disinherit, and then somebody wanted to contest that will based on any kind of opposition.
Yeah, so it's a very real possibility. We haven't seen that at least much yet that I'm aware of. We may, and I just haven't had to deal with it, so I'm not, aware. I think from a parent planning perspective, let's say you have one kid that's queer and one that's homophobic. You may want to change how you write the thing because you love both your kids, right? And so that may be a planning technique. That's how this kind of like unravels a little bit and creates more impact as you talk to parents if they have queer kids. You talk to queer couples, right? And that they can kind of impact each other. And so having the conversations with parents, hey, do you have any reason why your kids might fight over this and challenge the will? How do you want to handle that? Why are they challenging it? And if we know, hey, we know kid 1 is homophobic and we know kid 2 is queer, we'll specify in the will. I'm giving this to both my children. I understand that child 1 doesn't agree with child 2's lifestyle. I love both my kids. It's going both. If child 1 contests it, they're disinherited. Can do it like that. And then if they challenge it and invalidate the will, great. Then you go to descent and distribution, which is still going to split it equally.
So I guess that just really illustrates the need to be particular with your drafting, regardless of who you're drafting for and on behalf of, because there is the potential that other people could be involved that would be affected, and you just need to be careful with your drafting.
Yeah, be careful with your drafting, but also have the conversations, right? Like I remember back in law school when we talked about how all of these things were like contested. And I was like, gosh, if they just talk to each other, like, right, reasons marriages break, reasons relationships fail, reasons contracts aren't good, you don't communicate well. And so it's like just spending a little bit extra time to get to know your clients and get into what's your family dynamic, how is that going to play in, is really helpful. And this isn't just estate planning too. So if you're doing like business transactions, maybe you want to help, it's a queer-owned business. Great. Is there a certification available? Can you help them get that diversity at leg up for that? Is there special funding that's available? Like I know a lot of business attorneys that will do that for female and veteran-owned or Hispanic, African-American owned businesses, but they forget that there are also those availabilities for queer-owned businesses. So it's get to know your clients.
It's a really good point.
Yeah. Vanessa, how do the courts, Franklin, Delaware, react to this issue? Are they accepting, welcoming, assisting individuals with gender change? Franklin County is amazing. If you can ever get jurisdiction in Franklin County, it's great. I don't know if you know this, the probate court judge, Mackey, is a proud gay individual. And so he has created an amazingly supportive court system for name and gender change and to support the community. Delaware, I don't think is as friendly, but it's not hostile. Licking County is pretty hostile. I cannot tell you about the other surrounding counties. But Licking County used to require anyone who wanted a transition to have like multiple doctors' notes that specified exactly like what surgeries, what psychology they had gone through, which is not required by statute. So I don't know if that has changed. That's my memory from 5 or 6 years ago. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Anybody? We've got about 3 minutes.
I will drop in the chat.
I would just say, just from a personal standpoint, as a gay male who's been in a relationship for 22 years, legally married for 6 years, the kind of world we live in historically, things were made a certain way. And so for anything that's outside of that, including, an alternative lifestyle relationship, that's how loopholes are set up. That there's always something that someone can like look into to try to, block something or, stop something from going through. So, I mean, like for me and my husband, we have all those things in place. Like for both of us, we have a living will healthcare directive. We have, last will and testament for, both of us, so that if anything were to happen, God forbid, that we have those in place. And we know, that we did that for those reasons. And so for anyone that, I would be talking to, those are talking points that I would make sure to bring up. If I was advising someone, obviously I wouldn't be giving legal advice, but advising someone, just because I know it from a personal standpoint, if you will.
Yeah, that's a strategic business decision. That's why I'm doing estate planning for the LGBTQ community, because I have some of those same lived experiences, Malachi. And so I know like there's just an authenticity that comes with it. But
Right.
for all of our straight ally folks, if you're an amazing ally, you can have some of those relationships as well. You're not going to have the lived experiences, but you can be a wealth of resources. So, anyone else? Anything?
Okay. I don't see any other questions. So we will go ahead and thank you, Allison, for being with us today, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. I think that this has been very thought-provoking and very good, useful information for us all to have. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. And I put my email. If anyone has a question that they didn't feel comfortable asking, you can shoot me an email and I will talk to you one-on-one.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's program and have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.